Yeah, good to go.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deborah Young and I'm the CEO of the RegTech Association. And I would like to start today's gathering with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends with us today. A big warm welcome to you, and a big warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for making time in your busy day to join us. We designed this RegTech Open for Business program to highlight that the need for RegTech is clear and present, and especially during the times of this pandemic. And we feel very strongly that now is not the time to stall RegTech, now is the time to gear up. And today it's our great pleasure to be able to bring to life a solution that can help you grow your business with greater confidence even during this very challenging time. So today's title is Unpacking ASIC's Product Design and Distribution Obligations, or DDO. But I'd like everyone to think about, what's your current product risk and how are you managing that? And is this part of your RegTech strategy? Today, we have regulators, banks, financial institutions, members of the media. We have professional association bodies, consulting firms, stockbroking firms, research houses, universities, law firms, property groups, economists, super funds, fund administrators, accelerators, insurance companies, finance companies, and of course, a whole host of our supportive RegTech peers on the line today. And I even see one member has brought their entire team to learn something. So thank you for your support. And despite this particular event referencing an Australian regulatory requirement, we actually have 9 countries on the line today. So no pressure to my speakers at all today, but the world is watching you from 9 different countries. So we have a little bit of housekeeping that I'd just like everybody to be aware of. We would like it if everybody could remain on mute, please. And the only time that you'll come off mute is if you are a speaker, and we'd invite the speakers to put their cameras on as well. There will be a slideshow showing that Alison will manage from the background. The event today will be recorded, and that recording will be shared with you all, and we will send out a note following that with a survey. And we will actually use the chat function to put our questions online. And if you could please identify yourself with your question, with your name and your organisation, that's useful just so that we don't have things like Tom and Bill and Susie. We actually have some context for the question that would be useful. So I think that's all. So today we're going to have a discussion about design and distribution obligations. And we'll have a case study example and a discussion with Q&A. And we've got 2 great female leaders here with us today. The first is Lisa Ison, who is, Lisa is our 2018 Accelerator Award winner for Best Pitch and a finalist in our RegTech 2020 Awards. She has extensive experience in leading product lifecycle and governance teams in technology, telco, IoT and healthcare markets, where she has held roles as Chief Technology Officer and Head of Product. In her career, she's launched more than 55 technology products to consumer and B2B markets. Lisa and her team's achievements have been recognised with 5 Innovation and Customer Design Awards. Skyjed, Lisa's company, is a living example of RegTech not just being about financial services, but all regulated industries. I'd also like to introduce you to Samantha Carroll, who many of you will know as a leader in governance, regulation and compliance, and she works as a director at Ash Street Advisors. She has 15 years experience in private practice, including 10 years in the regulatory compliance division of Clayton Utz and 3 years as the head of compliance for a mid-tier bank. I'd like to thank them both for their contributions and getting today's presentation together. And without further ado, I'll hand over. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Deborah, and hello to everyone on the line, and I hope you are all staying safe and well. I do apologise for my voice. I'm suffering from a very bad cold, not COVID, so don't worry. And yeah, just I might sort of pause every now and then to catch my breath. But thank you for listening. What we thought we would do today to start off with is just set the scene a little bit. So if we just go to the next slide, what I thought I would do is just sort of recap on the timeline of where we're at today. And many of you would be aware that the legislation passed back in 2019, early 2019, with draft regulatory guidance from ASIC coming through towards the end of 2019. But Ddo, or the design distribution obligations, have really been around long before that. And in fact, the financial systems inquiry was the first sort of suggestion that we in Australia introduce a product governance guide, framework. And there are other jurisdictions throughout the world that already have product governance frameworks as well. So we're not while we do have an Australian focus today, it's great to see that there's some people from around the world listening in, because there are other obligations out there that are quite similar. And the financial systems inquiry really recommended that we introduce this framework. The government accepted that, and here we are today with the legislation coming through. And we've had a bit of a delay in implementation dates. So we were originally implementing the design distribution obligations in April next year, and that's been pushed back due to COVID to October. We're waiting on the final guidance from ASIC to come out. I've sort of recently heard that that's going to be towards the end of August, so hopefully we'll see that soon, because there's quite a lot of additional detail in that regulatory guidance. If you haven't already reviewed that, I'd suggest it's a good thing to have a look at, because that's going to be ASIC's approach as they regulate this particular obligation. So if we just move to the next slide, please. Really what we're doing here today is trying to give you the overview of the obligations. We really get into the nitty-gritty of how to implement those obligations. So there's a few different variations to how the obligations apply, and a bit of a difference in combinations. But the key obligations apply to issuers and distributors. And the issuers are those financial institutions that are developing the product, or really designing that product from the first point. And then some of the combinations might involve the issuer also distributing their own products, or the issuer distributing their products through another third party, or perhaps a distributor is distributing another issuer's products. So depending on which combination you sit within, the obligations are slightly different. But from an issuer perspective, the key obligations are to perform a target market determination, and there's a number of requirements in the legislation around how you perform that target market determination, and specific requirements that you need to include in that. The target market determination must be reviewed periodically, and upon some review triggers being activated, you're required to take reasonable steps in relation to distribution. And I've underlined that because it seems like a throwaway obligation, but there's a lot to taking reasonable steps in relation to distribution, and that really comes through in that regulatory guide that ASIC released. There are a lot of record-keeping obligations that attach to both your target market determination, and also as you go along evidencing that you've taken reasonable steps, and requirements to notify ASIC if you have what they refer to as a significant dealing, which is a dealing that's inconsistent with the target market determination. The order of those obligations is interesting when you think about it in the context of a product life cycle. You'd probably mix it up a little bit in the sense that you would start with the design components of your determining your target market determination, but then you would move quickly into monitoring and reviewing that particular target market with a view to making sure that you're distributing in accordance with your target market determination. So as you look at a cycle, it really starts with design, then distribution, monitoring and review, and that's probably the circle that you tend to follow. So while the obligations I've set out in a slightly different order, as you start to get into developing your governance frameworks, that's probably the way you're going to approach that. And I'm sure Lisa will get into that as well. And then just the slightly different obligations as a distributor, to make reasonable inquiries, to make sure you have that target market determination, and steps to distribute in accordance with that, and of course the record keeping, and also a requirement to provide certain information to your issuer that you're distributing on behalf of. So I'll just quickly jump into the next slide because I've only got really 30 seconds more. There's a couple of things I just wanted to mention in terms of implementation, and we might talk about that a little bit further. The Australian regime is quite a lot broader than the other regimes across the world. So we actually get into things like deposit products and credit products, whereas the UK regime, for example, only focuses on investment products. So that has been a bit of a challenge in terms of trying to work through how you would apply the similar obligations to determine your target market for simpler, what are arguably simpler products. And then also the obligations crossover. So the requirements under the design distribution obligations talk about suitability, but they're really applied across a class, not an individual, whereas you have other obligations that apply similarly to how you assess an individual appropriateness. So responsible lending and some of your advice requirements, for example. The other thing which will sort of be quite relevant today is how you integrate those things into your multiple systems, particularly because of this requirement to monitor to make sure that you're distributing in accordance with your target market. And just quickly on the next slide, to just demonstrate that monitoring point a little bit further, I just created a bit of a slide to give you a sense from even just my in-house experience, how you have a lot of information flowing into what is a pool of information and data that you would then need to use for multiple purposes. And I've just tried to outline some of those different reporting requirements just simply from a regulatory perspective there. But I will hand over to Lisa to take us through the next aspect.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa, and thanks Sam for soldiering on through that overview. It was a great overview. So I want to start by talking more about how we implement the foundation tools that you need for DDO in your organisation. And you know, when we talk about product management, we often talk about modern agile frameworks for new product development and our innovation, and we do a great job of that. And then when we think about our post-launch product management, we often talk about product lifecycle management as the frameworks that we use. And we intend to forget that that product lifecycle management was developed in 1962. And I kick myself every time I say that. And you know, you might say, well, why does that matter? So I want to take you on a journey today of how you can implement DDO with a digital framework, with a digital lifecycle framework that covers that design phase that Sam was talking about, but puts a whole new light on how you do that continuous monitoring. And as you do that, not only bringing time saving to your product team, but also doing that with your compliance teams. So let's kick off, and I'll give you a whirlwind tour of some of these tools that you can use to be able to monitor effectively across the life cycle. And when I think about that life cycle, it, as Sam said, it starts right at that planning stage. It follows through your development and your new product introduction. And it also finishes with that stage of where your products are sunsetting and you need to divest of those features that are either no longer performing or meeting your customer needs. So what are these tools you can use for the end-to-end view of your product governance? Now you'll see on this slide up the top what we call product health domain monitoring. Now this is something you can integrate into the day-to-day operations of your business, and we have reimagined the way that life cycle is managed, and we've created these 5 domains of product health that you monitor. Now these 5 domains cover your financial metrics, but importantly, they include the non-financial and operational risks that you'll face across your product life cycle. Now you can see here the 5 domains, and I'll just quickly talk you through them. The first one there is managing your revenue, and we're all really familiar with that. We do a great job of it. Then, however, we in this framework look at value, and what we do here is to prompt our product owners to look at or consider things like your supplier management and also your cost inputs. Next, in the centre, this framework is very customer focused around that customer experience and keeping your value propositions really alive. Then the framework looks at monitoring your innovation and the disruption across your product lifecycle, and then finally managing those regulatory obligations. So all the obligations you need for the design and distribution of the product, but also emerging areas like your modern slavery and climate-related risk across that product lifecycle. So that's your health domain monitoring. Now underneath that, the second tool that you can use for this end-to-end view is for your continuous monitoring. And at Skyjed, we call that a continuous auditing cycle. Now, what we're seeing in good product governance is that you really do have to review more regularly your products after they're launched. And we're seeing those timeframes improve to quarterly, monthly and weekly monitorings of that product lifecycle. Now you'll also see the final step on this slide in the monitoring cycle is about implementing risk and action plans. So this cycle isn't just about doing the review and generating some reports. It's about putting in place those strategic and risk actions and actually monitoring how you're going with them. Then you'll see just the final tool that you can use on the other side of the slide is this visual product health index. Now, this index gives teams a better understanding of not only the opportunity in their product life cycle, but also the risk. Because we believe that good risk management also supports the team around opportunity and product growth. So you'll see in this product index, it's a nice visual, color-coded, and it's ranked out of 100% so that you can quickly see the health status of your product. Now, this not only improves your decision-making around the health of the product, but over time you can compare how you're going and improving that product. Now, we think that the future's about your product, your compliance teams and your executives having discussions about this health check rating of both the risk and the opportunity in the life cycle. So these kind of tools, these kind of RegTech tools are not only really effective at bringing together your product and your compliance teams, but they're also a really effective way to reduce the costs that you will face in implementing your product compliance. So over on the next slide, just want to talk a little bit about how we approach this at Skyjed. So this is where Skyjed comes in. What we do through modern technology and this new product governance framework is that we do monitor all those operational and non-financial areas in your product lifecycle, and we also automate your risk reports and your action planning. So a big focus on identifying that risk, but then putting in place plans to mitigate it. Now, the benefit again here of a RegTech solution like Skyjed is that you don't need these sort of complex bespoke solutions. You can use these automated health index and risk reports. Now, you can do this without really long lead times, without complex IT projects, and also without the silos in your organisation. So how does it happen? Well, you can see here that we're using advanced data analytics to present to you all of those rich insights around your product and all the stakeholder reporting that you need between your product and your compliance teams is automated. So that saves a whole lot of time. Now, when you look at this, you can have that confidence that it is drawing on a broad range of data sets, more than 200 data sets across that product lifecycle, so you can see and get those really accurate insights as to where your product's at on its journey. So over on the next slide, you might say, how does all this work? Well, I'm just going to talk you through a bit of a case study here, an example, and I'll start as if I'm, say, a product leader of a digital payment and after payment product. So I'm the leader of that product. I would jump into Skyjet, and I can do that from anywhere in the world. And it has all the tools that I need for my product, my strategy setting, my monitoring, and importantly, the collaboration tools that I need. So I'd log in and I'd create my product portfolio for this consumer product. And then I'd be assigned the role as the product owner. And as the product owner, I'm accountable and I have all the permissions and rights for that product lifecycle, for the strategy setting, but also the monitoring and implementing the risk plans. So I've kicked off and I've created this payment product. The next thing I do is invite in my virtual team to collaborate with me around this product lifecycle. Now, in this instance, I'm going to invite in my compliance and a few people from my go-to-market team to contribute. Now, this new team audits and stores the product driver data across those 5 domains that we talked about earlier. And then the AI engine takes over and produces for you the risk insights and the health check. Now, from there, the final point, which I mentioned before, is about building the action plans and monitoring them so that you're improving that product health. Now, all of this is captured and stored in an audit trail that you can search over the lifecycle history of the product. So typically we see best practice teams kicking off and doing these quarterly deep dive audits, but bookending that with monthly risk reports and assessments and weekly monitoring of the actions. So on the other hand, if I was an executive or a board member, this also gives me visibility of the emerging risks in each of my product. Because I could say, for example, receive a report that tells me that 90% of my products have a health check of over 70%, or alternatively, your risk officers and your product teams can get notifications of certain thresholds. If a product falls below a certain health check, or if certain characteristics have been highlighted in that review that we've done as a cross-functional team. So if we just go over onto the next slide, I guess your next question might be, how difficult is this to implement? And how can your product and compliance teams use it for DDO? So what we typically find is that the product teams can get started in 3 simple steps. It's all around creating that product strategy, your virtual team, and starting that auditing process. And typically we see customers can set up the virtual workspace, they can do that in days, and complete their first baseline product audit in 4 to 5 weeks. Now, the benefits we're seeing of teams starting now to do that baseline is that it does surface where you've got gaps, where you've got risks, but it's also surfacing through that health check products that are in their sunsetting phase and need that divestment so that you can start and streamline the size of your portfolios. Now, all of this can happen and is happening with teams working remotely into the workspace with our COVID situation. So it's quite an effective tool to bring your compliance and go-to-market teams together around those design and distribution obligations. So the solution itself, we get great feedback that it's very intuitive and simple to use, but we've also included in it all of the documentation that you need around a product governance process, your video learning tutorials and a knowledge centre and an implementation plan as to how you can start to implement this into your product lifecycle teams. Now, if you go over onto the next slide, I just really wanted to narrow in here, what does all this mean for your Ddo workflow? So to help you get started, we've mapped a Ddo workflow and how that is all automated in our SaaS solution. And it includes all of the things you can see on the left-hand side, the ABCD. It includes your target market, setting your negative target markets, all of those triggers and notifications and thresholds that you might want to set, depending on the risk appetite of your organisation. So the final thing is that Skyjed also includes the automated Form A and Form B. So if you get to that stage where you need to notify the regulator, you can do that really efficiently. So you'll find this workflow in our guide and the steps of getting started. So just over on the next slide, I guess the last thing that I wanted to leave you with is that, you know, Ddo is really about good product governance. And when you pull it apart, it is quite logical, and it's a great opportunity to join your product teams with your compliance teams in a whole new effective way. But it's not, for me, it's just not about bringing those teams together to monitor your products after launch and refine and do those risk assessments. It's also about the fact that Skyjed is a workspace where you can pull together often between 5 and 7 functional teams, and you really start to break down those silos that exist around a product lifecycle. Now, look, I found, just to sort of share, that when I was leading product portfolios of probably more than 40,000 product variants, it wasn't that I didn't want to do this, you know, continuous monitoring of the product and do great risk assessments of the product portfolio. It's just that I got so busy and I didn't have the time to be consistent. So what we've done here is take away a lot of that challenge and pain by automating each of those steps that you need for Ddo. But I think really importantly, as product and compliance leaders, it is about sort of coming together and efficiently reviewing that life cycle. So to help us all address that challenge of culture and connection around a product life cycle, we have an ongoing collaboration with the Imperial College of London, where we're looking at how Skyjed helps you across the product lifecycle, particularly in that post-launch product management. If anyone's interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to share. So just to close over on my final slide, I guess a bit of a pitch for RegTech. So I think RegTech and solutions like Skyjed can really help you implement Ddo and your product governance sort of cost effectively and quickly to get started on that journey of good product governance. So finally, if you have a in-flight project or you're about to kick one off, we've got a step-by-step guide that you'll see in the webinar email after the webinar Q&A. And also if you'd like a demo of Skyjed, more than happy to help your Ddo and product teams. So thank you. Thanks, Deb, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, we do have a couple on here. First question is actually for Sam. How long should a product manufacturer distributor allow for the development of frameworks, policies, procedures, etc., in order to be Ddo compliant by 2021?
Hello, I'm here. If you're talking about how long to allow to sort of implement all of those controls, it probably depends on the complexity of your business and also what you've already got in place. But outside of that, I mean, I've got people sort of approaching me now, starting to perform assessments on their products to work out what's included, what's not. The target market determinations themselves can take a bit of working out, because I think the key to that is actually defining the target market in a way that you can actually monitor. So thinking about the metrics as you're designing your target market determination takes quite a bit of time. And then also, just to give you a sense, if you're documenting your product governance framework, which ASIC has recommended that you do, that in itself takes a bit of time to work through because of all the different combinations of obligations that I was referring to earlier. So I really think you should be starting now if you haven't already, unless you've got a fairly straightforward business with only a couple of products. If you're talking about, a larger business, multiple products, 20 to 30 products, it's really important to start doing that now.
Do you have anything to add to that, Lisa?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Look, I fully agree. We are seeing teams start now, and I think the benefit of that is that if you start reviewing your product portfolios, it gives you a great opportunity not only to look at where you can find growth in this climate, but also start to surface those products that you may want to divest of as you lead up to the design and distribution obligations. And I think the other thing that we find is that the team starting now, it's not so much about having the perfect product governance sort of framework all documented. It's about sort of starting with a framework, implementing it, and then doing a retrospective to say, how's it going? Is it working? And refining it. So if you're starting now, you've got that nice runway to be able to refine it and make your teams more effective by the time you get to that implementation cliff.
Yeah. So Lisa, a question for you. This is one of our favourite questions at the RegTech Association that we get asked. So what's the usual lead time to complete an integration with Skyjed?
So the lead time, we see teams, it varies, getting up and running in days, going in and starting using Skyjet. I guess typically what we're seeing as best practice, though, is that organisations will select maybe their top 60 strategic products and start with a journey of, putting in place the governance and doing their first audit cycle, doing that health check, generating those risk assessments, going through that cycle with the strategic products across their product teams. So you may have put in place sort of 60 products. And then, as I said before, then looking at how do they want to tailor that to their organisation. And as I said, in Skyjed, you can tailor that driver data, and you can also tailor your thresholds and the notifications. So you can go through that process in a short period of time, and as Sam said, it's also about the sort of planning happening in parallel with that. So you can get up and running really quickly.
And the ability to customise that to, specific requirements?
Yeah, so look, as you said when you started off, we're a pure RegTech solution. So this auditing framework, I think, interestingly enough, we're obviously, since the Hayne Royal Commission, getting a lot of interest in financial services, but also across a broad range of industry sectors. I mean, they are looking at the challenge of product growth, product simplification, and a governance tool that complements all the hard work they've done on their agile tools, but now complements how they can really cost effectively monitor their products post-launch. And I think if you think about that space and RegTech, definitely that's where Skyjed's supporting teams across a broad range of industry sectors around that. And each you can tailor to those different industry sectors. But what we are finding is that with product lifecycle governance, there are a lot of commonalities across most industry sectors. So they're all using the current drivers and health check and risk reports that are in there. Some people are adding some new drivers. So you might be concerned about some key areas and you start to add that in. You can do that dynamically. You can do that in minutes.
Great.
Deborah, I was just going to mention one example in terms of the systems and the data and information side of things for monitoring. We had one example where we were defining target market determinations and review triggers, and it identified a need to reclassify how complaints are being categorised, because one of the requirements is to actually monitor complaints to use as an indicator for the health of your product. So I think if you're kind of uncovering those sorts of issues, and I know from my own experiences, it does take time to, reclassify a complaints categorization as an example. So I think it's really important just to not get too focused on the actual target market determination as being the only obligation, because there's a lot of things that relate back to that need to be considered.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I'm happy to report that you have a fan here. Great presentation from Sam Carroll. Will be worth having her back, I think. There you go.
Oh, thank you, whoever said that.
That was an old friend of yours, Steve York.
Oh, hey, Steve.
So Jaden Loveridge from NAB, a question for Sam. How much of an impact will best interest duties help mortgage brokers meet Ddo? Thanks, Jaden.
Hi, Jaden. Thanks for the question. There is a specific reference in the current draft regulatory guide to the best interest duty. And what that actually says at the moment is that if you meet your best interest duty, you will be taken to have met the requirements to take reasonable steps in your distribution obligation. I'm expecting they'll probably go into a little bit more detail on that, hopefully in the next final or draft guide that we get out, because it probably didn't go into enough detail as to not just the best interest duty, but things like the responsible lending obligation. It wasn't actually spoken about at all. But I'd probably just go back to the point I said right at the start, which is the design and distribution obligations are focused on how you're designing and distributing and making decisions around designing and distribution to classes of people, whereas your best interest duty and responsible lending and things like appropriate advice are focused more on the actual individual interactions. But it's good to see that they actually picked up that overlap, at least for the best interest duty.
Yeah, great. So I'm just thinking, in the interest of staying to time, if I'm going to throw to each of you to kind of maybe wrap up. So it's either the question that you never get asked that you believe that people should be asking you, or the thought that you'd like to leave us with. So either a question that never comes up but should, or the thought that you would like to leave us with today. Maybe I'll start with you, Lisa.
Sure, thanks, Deb. So, look, I'd say, with product governance, it's just a great opportunity for your product and your compliance teams to come together, not only to look at that growth and improve the growth position of their products, but also to have a new way to monitor a product after it's launched and generate those risk insights. So at the end of the day, those teams coming together provides a big benefit for the organisation around growth and the risk management. So I'd encourage teams out there to start and kick off their projects and go on that journey for the dual benefit of growth, of bringing together your risk and compliance teams around these life cycle frameworks and the health of their products. So I think it's a big opportunity.
And I take it that there's a bit of information on your website, www.skyjed.com. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
All good. And Sam?
Oops. Oh, look, I completely agree with Lisa. I am definitely a true believer in using these sorts of things to improve your business operations. And I think the Ddo is quite a unique opportunity because it does sort of align with product cycles and maybe doing that in a better, more developed way than what you have in the past. And it's certainly seeing some business advantages in, refining your product suites and things like that. The only thing I would leave people with is not to be lulled into a false sense of security that there's only sort of 4 or 5 obligations that I listed on that slide. There's a lot to those obligations, and it's worth taking the time to look into that so you do actually get that business benefit.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I know that everybody is very grateful to you for taking the time today to come and share all about the DDO, and it was good to have some practical, application of that as well. So thank you very much to Lisa and Sam. I thought I'd just wrap up by actually calling out, if anybody on the line is interested to do an event similar to this, please get in touch with us. You have to be a member of the association to present at one of these, but I think there's a, just going by the number of people that we have attending our events and the calibre of people and the great mix of organisations, this is a great way that you can get your key messages out there. So what's next in the series? We've got RegTech Open for Business coming up in, 2 weeks' time, Transforming for the New Future. That's going to be 6 tips for you to transition with artificial intelligence, and that's sponsored by Microsoft. And then we will have also, as part of our Global Perspectives series, we're going to be talking to some people in the Canada, US, and compare with Australia on where we're all at with COVID and what's actually happening in those RegTech jurisdictions right now. And during August, we've just launched our speech and voice analytics, and we'll also have a financial crime RegTech Edge happening in a couple of weeks' time. And if you haven't already done so, 18th of March 2021 is when our Accelerate RegTech conference will be next year, so stay tuned. We are developing the program right now. And if you're wondering who our members are, there they are on that slide. That's also available on our website. And if you'd like to join them, then here is the URL, all of the information on joining the association and becoming part of our part of this community to accelerate adoption of RegTech and being part of our global Centre of Excellence. You'd be more than welcome to get in touch. So thank you very much. I'm going to stay on the line just for maybe 5 minutes if anybody wants to hang about, and if Sam and Lisa can hang in there as well in case there are any additional questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to stay on the line. I'll stay on the line for another 5 minutes or so. But other than that, I'll call proceedings to a close. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sam.
thanks everyone for
Pleasure.
joining.
No worries. No worries.